I'm Matt Landau from VRMB, and this is Unlocked, Season 9, Home Runners. This episode features Eddie Love, who's the owner of Mountain Mama Homes in Harper's Ferry, West Virginia, which manages 15 properties, allowing Eddie to get super proximate to the day-to-day operations, the ins and outs, the guts and glory of vacation rental success. Eddie started renting his second home originally and managing it himself. But when he got laid off from his fintech job and went all in, things changed dramatically. In this interview, we talk about the do's and don'ts of outsourcing in the early days, tools that enhance your version of hospitality beyond just automating tasks, and the variety of lessons that Eddie has learned about innovation, but not reinventing the wheel. There's a delicate balance between those two things. This episode is brought to you by Point Central, the leaders in smart home automation, and Breezeway, a property care and operations platform. As with every episode this season, I've kicked off the interview by asking Eddie, what does home runners mean to you?
So in the context of vacation rentals, at least, when I hear the word home runners, I think of the boots on the ground, people behind the scenes who never get any of the glory, but are doing the critically necessary work that goes into making these magical experiences for our guests. And those people are running around all the time doing unglamorous work. Can't remember who it was in one of the earlier podcasts who said that we scrape poop off of toilets.
Oh yeah, Sarah Bradford.
That's right, Sarah. That about sums it up. And I think especially, I think people inside the industry tend to get this, but for folks who are outside the industry, I think it's easy to lose sight of just how hard this is and how much work goes into making all the magic happen.
I love that. That's the first version, that's the first type of response that we've had this season that really touches into an element of the guts and the glory. I'm thinking like showrunners on a film set are kind of a similar type of person, a similar type of craft, and a similar kind of outcome, would you say?
I think that's right. Yeah. And you have this in other industries too, where there are the people who actually make things happen, but never sit in the limelight and never get a lot of the credit. But I think we're definitely in an industry where those people really make it all happen.
Amen. And Eddie, would you consider yourself a home runner?
I would, yes. We're still a very small company. We are at 15 properties right now. By the end of the year, it's October. By the end of the year, we will probably be at about 20. But we're still at that scale though, where I, as the business owner, am very close to operations, very close to the day-to-day activity, and sometimes you've got to drop everything you're doing and go pick up something for a guest because it's critical and now defunct amenity. And I do have a full-time operations manager now. His name's Tim. We brought him on in May of this year, and he does a ton of this work. And Tim is really my number one home runner, and the guy who now more than I do makes all of this stuff happen. But again, we're still at a size where everyone's got to pitch in. So yeah, I'd say I'm still a home runner.
I would say you're a home runner too. And to a degree, I think all home runners need to know all of the things happening underneath the hood. You need to know how the different pieces work. You need to scrape the poop off the toilets once or twice in order to be able to lead other home runners. In fact, I had a really interesting conversation with a brand new vacation rental professional, a new up and coming home runner at the Casago retreat down in Oaxaca, Mexico with Steve Schwab, who you know. And this new person was asking all these seasoned people, um, what is the first hire that I need to make? Which in a linear business growth process would have an obvious answer. But of course, we are not linear. We don't have obvious answers in this new space. And the feedback that he got was basically do all of the work yourself at the beginning, learn what goes into the nuances, learn the complexity, the operational complexity. And then when you get to a breaking point, you'll have an idea of the kinds of jobs that you want to outsource to. Is that kind of the path that you started off with?
I think that's definitely the path I started off on, as much by necessity as anything else. So the way we got started was I was living in the DC area, had a full-time job, and
What were you doing?
I was most recently before this, I was working at a fintech startup. It's called Street Shares. They have pivoted a little bit since I was there, but it was started as a company to do small business lending, especially to military veterans who had left the service and were now running their own small businesses. And yeah, so that's what I was doing in DC at the time. I was in a very analytical role there. I was doing credit analytics. So it was a lot of number crunching and modeling and a very kind of analytical role. And I've taken a lot of that, or taken a lot of the skills from that experience and applied them to vacation rentals in one way or another. But while I was living in the DC area, we bought a little cabin out here in West Virginia, Harper's Ferry, which is where we are now, and started renting that out on Airbnb, VRBO, as one of these single home kind of hosts who's self-managing a property. So that's how we got started, and I think that's it's not an uncommon founder story in the industry. It seems like a lot of us just kind of happen into this and either see certain opportunities to meet a need that's not being met in the area or to provide a better service than other managers are providing at the time. And I think that describes us to some degree. The other thing that's maybe a little bit unique is the pandemic hit in 2020. And just like everyone else, we saw this huge wave of cancellations immediately. And there was some fear, as you might expect, about, oh my gosh, I've got this property. This property has expenses which don't go away just because people stop renting it, and what's going to happen. But we happen to be just by luck in a market that within a few weeks after that big cancellation wave was booked all the way back up. And then by that summer of 2020, we were just seeing unbelievable levels of demand because we are in a market, number one, that's driving distance to major metro areas, especially Washington, D.C., but cities up and down the East Coast. Obviously, we were offering vacation rentals rather than hotels or bed and breakfasts. And when people were looking to socially distance, that type of accommodation had new appeal for people. And then number three, we're in a destination that offers tons of outdoor activities. I mean, the reason that people come to Harper's Ferry, the reason people come to West Virginia is so that they can get outside and go hiking and go rafting on the rivers and do these sorts of things that you can do outdoors, you can do while you're socially distanced. And so in any case, that this all kind of added up to this perfect storm where we just had unbelievable levels of demand from guests. And so at the same time, I actually got laid off from that company that I was working for in DC. Again, they were serving small businesses, they were providing a lending product, and it doesn't take much imagination to see how they were, in their own way, getting crushed by the pandemic, as it was putting a lot of stress on small businesses.
Did you see that coming?
I I knew that the company was probably going to find itself in trouble. So I worked in credit analytics, which means that I was the guy behind the scenes who was putting together models, putting together criteria around which businesses do we make loans to and which businesses don't we make loans to. So I was the one, as much as anyone at the company, who could see delinquency rates going up, could see companies getting behind on their payments, could see that this was going to be pretty troublesome for the company, to say the least. So I knew that the company was finding itself in a difficult spot. I think there were certain opportunities that they were able to pivot to, I think successfully. And so I was thinking that we would be okay, that I would be okay, wouldn't necessarily lose my job. But the company decided, as part of this pivot, to completely drop the entire department, if you will, of the company that I was in and I was helping to lead. So it was pretty much everyone in that part of the company was gone within there was 1 week where everyone was gone.
So what was the feeling? What was the feeling upon receiving that? Was it complete terror, or was it temporary terror, and then suddenly my vacation rental business is doing well, this is my chance to step up?
Yeah, so there was a little bit of uncertainty, obviously, with a situation like that, because it was a little bit unexpected. But I had already known at that point that at some point in the future, I probably really wanted to spend all of my time in vacation rentals in the Harper's Ferry area. So that had already been decided. I thought it would happen a few years down the line, and not quite so suddenly. But that was a little, well, that was a great big push, or maybe call it a kick in the behind, out the door, and an opportunity to decide, do I look for another full-time job doing something similar, working in someone else's company, or if I know that this is what I want to do in the future, do I push all my chips to the center of the table and try to find a way to make this work in the near term so that I can get on with building this business that I already know I want to build. And it was definitely a gamble, and a tough decision to make. But again, because guest demand was so much higher than it had ever been, and that I had ever imagined it could be, during those few years of the pandemic, it was kind of the perfect opportunity to be able to double down, and work on building this business. And so it was one door that was closing, with a layoff, and another door that was opening. And I think a lot of being an entrepreneur is just seeing the opportunities that are out there, the opportunities that come up perhaps out of the blue or unexpectedly, and betting on them, and knowing when to go all in, when you've got an opportunity.
And really sensing a moment, having confidence in the experience that you've been building in your craft and your positioning, and sensing that moment to gamble really on yourself is the bet here. You, Eddie, started the business, I think you said, in not an uncommon way, sort of accidentally, like many home runners. But you did take a strategy that I would say is a little bit uncommon in your uh, choice to outsource pretty much everything to upstart your business. And I'm curious if there's anything you do differently in hindsight about choosing to outsource, and or any lesson that you learned the hard way.
I started the business as just a one-man show. It was just me, and I knew I wanted to grow the company quickly. I saw that there was opportunity in our market, and just for a little bit of background, so the Harper's Ferry area is home to Harper's Ferry National Park. It's this great 19th century town with a lot of, especially Civil War history. It played a big role in the Civil War, but it's also definitely an outdoor destination in the Mid-Atlantic. The Appalachian Trail runs right through town. In fact, the headquarters for the Appalachian Trail Conservancy, the organization that maintains the whole trail from Georgia to Maine, is headquartered here. Harper's Ferry is more or less the halfway point of the trail too, and it's also the confluence of the Shenandoah River and the Potomac River, and you've got beautiful cliffs and tons of forests. It's like really an incredible outdoor place, and very close to Washington, D.C. It's only about an hour drive away. And then obviously you've got other cities that aren't much farther than that. So you had this place that people have been coming to for decades. There's a pretty well-developed tourism sector here. But for all of that, there really was not another professional vacation rental company that was serving this market, even though there was demand from guests, even though people have been visiting. Some people come multiple times a year and will even stay overnight, but there just wasn't a company that was professionally managing vacation rentals. And so I saw a lot of opportunity with that. And that's part of the reason why we made this bet. But getting back to your question about outsourcing, because there was all of this opportunity, I knew that we had the potential to grow really quickly, but also I was a one-man show, and I'm just a one-man show. And I was looking for ways that we could scale quickly without having to add a bunch of headcount really quickly at the same time. And so I was looking for solutions out there that would empower me in my limited time to go further. And so that is both outsourcing and leveraging technology. So, and I kind of almost think about these things in the same category in a way, because both outsourcing and technology are ways to scale my time without bringing on full-time help in the way of employees. So I spent a lot of time looking at what are the tools that are out there that are built to serve people in the vacation rental space who are doing exactly what I'm doing, and who are the service providers who are very familiar with our space and serving other people like me. And the reason to do that, or the reason to find the argument for outsourcing something like your accounting or a call center solution, and finding a partner that knows the industry really well, is that you could be at 2 properties or you could be at 20 properties, and you don't have to add more people. They just they can scale with you as you scale. Whereas if you're trying to handle all of that in-house, pretty quickly from 5 properties to 10 or 15, you've doubled or tripled the work, and you need to double or triple the headcount if you're not doing if you're not using either technology or some kind of service provider that can just scale up as you scale up.
And so, what were some of those first outsourced companies that, in hindsight, were really pivotal?
It mostly started with technology, actually, rather than outsourcing to service providers. So and to this day, I'm always looking for great new technology to incorporate into the business and help us scale. And I think the vacation rental space, granted, I've only been doing this since 2018, so about 4 years or so. And I don't know what the landscape was like before this, but it's my impression that even in the last 5 years, 10 years, the technology available to vacation rental managers has really boomed, and there are a lot more tools. There are a lot more tech companies out there that are building the kinds of things that are making vacation rental managers much more effective, and able to scale much more easily. So for us, one of the very first things that we looked for a tool for was guest messaging, because there are so many parts of so there's a lot of communication that goes on in this business. We're uh, welcoming, we have very short stays, like 2.7 nights on average. And so we've got new guests in there every couple of days, and every guest needs to know how to check in. You need to check in with them and make sure that they're doing okay after they've arrived to the property and maybe stayed there a night. They need instructions on how to check out. And so with all of these, even if you're just doing those few touch points, you need to do that for a ton of guests every month. And so, and those are also things that have a pretty set formula to them, and they're the kinds of things that lend themselves to technology solutions. And so guest communication was definitely one of the first things that we looked to outsource.
And what I really like about that for our listeners as well is you're starting with a pain point. And this is something I learned in our Unlocked episode with Paul, one of the co-founders of OwnerRez, which is property management software. He said, we grow not randomly. We grow based on our pain points, the things that are keeping us from evolving. We address them. That's his kind of growth strategy. And it sounds like that's what you were using for guest messaging too.
Absolutely. I think that as much as I love good technology, I'm not out there just looking for any piece of technology just because it's just because it can do something that's relevant to my business
that you weren't even aware of.
Right. Now, in some cases, I have found technology providers where I learned about the solution and what they were providing. I think one example of this is a company called Revyoos, Revyoos.
Yeah, that's a fellow Inner Circle member, Christoph Salmon.
Yeah, I think they're great. I think they've got a really great product, and they're very focused on one, relatively small issue, and that's just the fact that guest reviews build a lot of credibility with a manager, with someone who's renting out a property if you're self-managing, and that's part of the reason that many guests will go to a Vrbo or an Airbnb and book there rather than coming to book directly on a manager's website, because they know that the reviews are there. They know that the reviews, to a large degree, can be relied upon as being true, and so that's why they go there. So what Reviews is doing is taking all the reviews that you've earned on all these different OTAs, even your Google My Business page if you have one, and aggregates all of them and puts it into a nice clean little widget that just sits on your website. And what that does is anytime a guest, potential guest, lands on your direct booking site, and they don't have to question so much, like, is this website legit, or am I gonna pay a bunch of money and then find that there's really no house there, or some other nightmare scenario. And so I think it does build a lot of credibility. Now, when I found out about reviews, that was not a pain point for me necessarily. It wasn't necessarily on my radar, but as soon as I understood what they were doing, I saw that, oh my gosh, yes, this is clearly an issue for guests, and this is one reason why our direct bookings might be a smaller percentage of our bookings than I would like to see. So that's an example, I think, of a tool where I wasn't necessarily aware of a pain point, or wasn't necessarily thinking that this was a problem that needed to be solved. But as soon as I saw that there was someone out there solving it in a simple, I think, creative way, and we're providing good value for what the tool cost, it was easy to get on board with that. And they're a great company, and I've been pretty happy with them.
Shout out to reviews. So those were two pieces of technology that helped either solve pain points or accelerate goals or values that you had. What about actual service providers? I understand that might not have been at the very beginning, but what service provider thinking, does that change as opposed to technology?
No, I think it's the same. It's the same kind of thing, and there are certain problems that cannot be entirely solved by technology, or at least no one's yet found a good way to do it. And there will always be problems that cannot be solved by technology. At the end, it's always going to come back to some kind of person at the end of the line who's taking care of you when things are going bad. Oftentimes, that's going to be me, or it's going to be someone on my team. But in some cases, you can also outsource those. So one example that comes to mind immediately, because it's been very top of mind for the past month or so, is our call center solution. So as we were scaling, and we've gone from 2 properties in May of 2021, so May of last year, to we'll be at 20 properties this December. So in 18 months or so, give or take, going from 2 to 20 properties. So we've been scaling pretty quickly, and as we've scaled, we get more and more phone calls from people, and at the same time, we're running around and doing more and more things, and are less available to take those phone calls right when they come in. So I was looking for a call center solution so that if someone called in and we weren't able to answer within the first few rings, it would roll over to some person who could pick up the phone and talk to our guest, talk to the homeowner, whoever it is that's calling, and either solve their problem or take a message and escalate to us when necessary. So that's been a super helpful service to have as we've been scaling and growing so quickly. But it's also the kind of thing that couldn't be solved completely by technology, or at least not in the same way. A lot of people, when they're calling in, they don't want to get a voicemail. They want to be able to talk to someone. Even if that person can't solve their problem immediately, they want to know that they talked to a real person and felt like they were heard, and that someone's going to get back to them. And this call center service that we found at the beginning of this year is called TCB, Taking Care of Business. And they were great. I loved everything about the service. They were reliable. They treated our guests well. They did a good job passing on messages, or escalating if there was an urgent issue that needed our immediate attention. And one thing that they did really well is in the few instances where we had guests who were locked out of a property, we use smart locks everywhere. So every guest should have their own code and it should work when they get there and plug it in. But inevitably, every once in a while, you're going to have something go wrong with that and someone can't get into the property. And what TCB could do is they could answer the phone. I confirmed that guest had an active reservation at the time and should be able to get into the property. And then they could give them a backup code and get them in, even without having to talk to me or someone else on my team. And that has been a very helpful service to have. Now, the reason I said that this has been top of mind the last month or so,
and the reason you're talking in past tense,
is that TCB announced 3 or 4 weeks ago that they were no longer going to be able to serve the industry, and that service is stopping on Halloween of this year. So that left us scrambling, and many others. I know a number of folks in the inner circle, other managers elsewhere who were using TCB, who were similarly over the moon with their service, thought they were just the bee's knees, and now they are also looking for some other replacement. So I haven't yet landed on one, so I'm not able to point anyone in a better direction, unfortunately. But that's an example of, I think, an outsourced service rather than technology that was super helpful to us, and again allowed us to continue to grow and scale without adding more headcount to our company and to the payroll.
And now a word from our sponsors. Point Central provides smart property solutions for smart vacation property managers. They help streamline operations, protect the property, and enhance the guest experience using keyless access. Why? Because guests are tired after traveling, duh. And being able to go directly to that property with keyless access instead of stopping at a manager's office, this is no longer a luxury. This is a standard practice. Plus, everybody loves avoiding extra trips due to lost keys, not to mention the constant cost of rekeying. Point Central partners stay aware with an activity log of who enters and leaves the property, which helps keep track of cleaning and maintenance crews as well. You can also gain control of your utility bills with their smart thermostats. Schedule set points so guests won't be able to drastically raise or lower the temperatures, for instance. You can ensure the temperature stays consistent when the unit is vacant. Prevent costly maintenance projects caused by water leaks, mold, or HVAC issues with real-time alerts that allow you to be proactive. Visit pointcentral.com/VRMB to learn more. And Breezeway, whose property care and operations platform helps you coordinate, communicate, and verify the detailed work and deliver the best service experience to your guests. With tools for intelligent task scheduling, quality assurance, real-time work coordination, guest messaging, supplies management, owner reporting, and more, oh my! Breezeway helps thousands of short-term rental managers and hospitality operators increase your operational efficiency and eliminate hours of manual work. This allows you to boost your service revenue. It was created by the founding team of FlipKey, which was since acquired by TripAdvisor, and Breezeway is just elevating the experience at every property they touch. Visit breezeway.io/VRMB and get implementation fees waived. That's a $1,000 value right there. Okay, let's get back to the show. And listeners and maybe outsiders to the industry may hear the story up until now and sort of lump you, Eddie, into this category of new vacation rental / short-term rental / dare I say it, Airbnb hobbyists who outsource as much as humanly possible, who try to automate as much as they can, and who are purely extracting from communities and not really being involved and not really doing the old-fashioned hospitality hard work that we started talking about at the beginning. Did you find yourself on that path to try to make everything automated and tech up, or did you from the beginning remember those core roots?
I think you are right that this is something I've come into and grown into, I think. So when I was first getting started, like I said, I had another full-time job. This was a side gig for me, and I needed it to take as little of my time as possible. And so I did that. So I looked for tools that would and technology that would help make this as easy as it could be for me. And then we went from one property to two, and I started setting my sights on, growing a quote unquote real company out of this and making it into a business. And I think that with that, similar to the way that I got started and that kind of mindset, I think whole companies have grown out of that, where you've got dozens of properties, maybe more than that even, and you've got managers who continue to have the same kind of mindset of it's not hospitality focused necessarily. It's all about how can I be as efficient as possible, and how can I do as little work as possible and still make a bunch of money running this kind of quote unquote Airbnb business.
It's kind of like a real estate thinking.
It is, absolutely. I followed a lot of those sort of forums, like, Bigger Pockets is one of the bigger ones, where you've got these people. It's not entirely a get rich quick scheme, but you've got all these people who see that buying residential long-term rentals can be very profitable, and that there is a path to scale that relatively quickly without it becoming an overwhelming amount of work. And you've got a lot of people that are aiming to, get to their 30 rental properties and then sit on a beach in Hawaii sipping pina coladas for the rest of their lives. And I think there is some of that mentality has made its way into the short-term rental space. And a lot of this really has been driven by Airbnb. I mean, before Airbnb, before the last 10, 15 years or so, it would be inconceivable to build the kinds of businesses that people with this frame of mind are building, where, for one thing, oftentimes the location doesn't matter. It only matters to the extent that the location of the property is good for returns as an investment, where obviously you want to make sure there's enough demand, that you've got guests who are interested in coming to that location wherever it is. But many people with this frame of mind are just as happy to buy one rental property in Texas and one in Tennessee and one in Florida and a dozen in California. These properties can be scattered all over the country. They're not concentrated in any kind of geographic location. And that kind of thing, again, is only possible because of companies like Airbnb. And really, going back to the technology solutions, the tech that's available now has made it much more possible, much easier to run a business like that, which is, geography agnostic, if you will, and get away with it. Whereas before Airbnb, you just would never build a business like that, because it mattered so much more that you had a local presence, you had boots on the ground that were not boots on the ground folks who were bought in. They were either full-time employees or worked very closely with your business and were not just kind of say one-off cleaners who will come and clean your property for you if you only have one property, but they don't really work closely with you. And so I think I think I would have thought of myself as one of these newer companies kind of building a business this way. But when I decided to go all in on our vacation rental company, it was because I loved this area. I love Harper's Ferry, and I think it has a ton of potential that's not being fully realized yet. That I want to share with guests who are coming to the region. But at the same time, I love the community, and I want to make sure that the community isn't harmed by some of the ill side effects, if you will, that can present themselves with vacation rentals. And we've all seen the headlines and read the horror stories and know what can how things can go very badly if you've got players in the space who are not thinking first and foremost about the community and are thinking instead first and foremost, perhaps only about the how much money they can make with a property. So as we've been building this business here, I've tried to maintain a pretty balanced approach, and in fact, for us, the order of priorities here is going to be number one, the homeowners, number two, the community, the neighbors, and then number three, the guests. So I think we're actually pretty community centric, pretty owner centric compared to guests. We treat our guests very well. We provide a very high quality service for them in beautiful properties, but we also are very careful to make sure that the guests that we bring into the area are going to be good for the area and are not going to, they're going to treat everyone with respect. They're going to do right by the community. And I think bringing this full circle with especially a model where your properties are all over the place, in different states even, and that you never have any kind of concentration in any one geographic area. I think that's detrimental to communities, and I think it's just too easy for that when you've got not just absentee owners of the property, but absentee managers too. When you don't really have a presence in the community, it's just too easy for things to go badly, and it makes the entire industry look bad, I think.
And is that a personal growth story that you have gone through? Is that a business play, recognizing that if we don't do this, our business model is not sustainable? Which would you say, it's personal or business, perhaps both? And what would you say, how do we communicate that in an urgent way to others who are listening? Like, how can they accelerate that little discovery that you made?
I think it's both. I think it's personal and business. On the personal side, I would say that what I just described has always aligned with my values, with what I think is important. I think it's important to do right by other people and to be to bring more good than harm to any kind of endeavor, any kind of community that you're part of. I think what changed was as I got a couple of years into this, my understanding of how this thing could go badly and how there could be negative impacts on neighbors. I've had an instance or two of guests coming to the property and not treating the property well, and not treating the neighborhood and the community well. And those experiences were formative, and really brought home for me the fact that, look, this industry really does have risks associated with it, and you have to think very carefully and be very strategic about the way that you mitigate those risks and make this a good experience, not just for guests, but for all the stakeholders, including especially the neighbors and the community. So I would say it's not so much that my values changed on this. It's just that I saw how it could go badly, and saw how important it was to mitigate those risks. On the business side, as far as the business case for this too, I think, we've all seen how, especially in the last year or two, attempts at pretty iron-fisted and ruthless regulation of short-term rentals has started cropping up, even in destinations where you may not have expected it to come, because they're traditionally tourist destinations, resort towns, and like live and die by tourism. But I don't have to tell you, Matt, that even in places like that, there's the threat of significant regulations, which can shut whole businesses down. Businesses, by the way, that may be trying to do things the right way, and may be approaching this with the right frame of mind, but who are painted into a corner because they're lumped in with these otherwise bad actors who are tarnishing everyone's reputation. And another just small thing, if you need to really make a business case for this to someone, when you're focused on a relatively dense geographic area and all your properties are there, it's just so much easier to market, because you can actually own your destination. You can be the subject matter expert, and you can have all kinds of great content on your website that you share with guests, so that they understand that you really know your stuff when it comes to the area. And then also, there are all kinds of search engine benefits for that. And so if you really want to build a sustainable business, which is driven by direct bookings much more than it is by OTA bookings, then being concentrated in a geographic area makes that so much more feasible and so much more possible. And again, this is why a geographically dispersed business model couldn't have been imagined before Airbnb, because it just wouldn't make sense. You couldn't possibly do the kinds of like the level of marketing that you would have to do in every single one of those destinations if you only have one or two properties there. And so that's why that's why you've got a strong business case, even just from a marketing standpoint, for having a densely being located in a geographic area with most of your properties, all of your properties right there.
And I would take that one step further, being in a place where there's other property owners and managers who are on the same page, working together to protect these kinds of businesses and passions, which is directly correlated with a bottom line. And it's become the theme of season 3 of the How to Save Your Vacation Rental Business podcast, hosted by Dana Lubner, that I'm the co-host of. We're developing ways for new investors and existing operators to determine how healthy is a vacation rental destination from an advocacy perspective. And we look at things like, is there an alliance that has been meeting regularly? Do you have strength in numbers with the members of these kinds of groups? Are you regulated currently? Is there any kind of law that has put its finger on something, fair or not? Just to give people an idea of how important all these things are to begin thinking about, ideally before it's not too late. And this kind of leads me into my last question for you. you are part of a new generation who owns properties that they manage, which I think is really emerging as an interesting category of our sector. Do you think that there is anything really disruptive about this group of individuals as opposed to those who have historically had very asset light business models and merely manage homes for others?
I'm not sure that. Well, there are certain advantages that come with owning properties that you are also managing yourself. For one thing, it's much easier to put yourself in the shoes of your homeowners because you are in their shoes when it comes to your own properties. And so, you know, I often have these conversations with homeowners, and I know other managers can often similarly get frustrated having these conversations over and over with homeowners about investing in their properties and uh, making the time, the financial investments to make their properties really spectacular. And we happen to be in a business where it often makes sense. You can have pretty high ROI, high return on investment from strategic upgrades to your properties. And I have conversations all the time with owners where I'm trying to pitch them on these things, trying to explain, you really ought to make this improvement or do this way. And look, you'll make all your money back in the first year. And then every year after that, it's just gravy on top. It's kind of a no-brainer. And we have homeowners who will listen to that and still decide not to pull the trigger, not to make the investment. But with those kinds of conversations, it's so much easier for me to approach that kind of conversation with complete confidence because I'm not telling them anything that I wouldn't do myself if I owned their property or anything that I'm doing with the properties that I do own myself. So I think in that sense, it's easier to understand homeowners because you've been in their shoes. But I think you also have more credibility with making those kinds of pitches to them because I can say, and I often do, look, I would do this myself. It's kind of a no-brainer. You really ought to do it. And that I think is more convincing to homeowners. And the other thing along these same lines is when you own the properties, you just have complete control over those things and you don't have to talk someone else into it. I mean, we are targeting properties that are definitely at the premium end of our market. I won't call them luxury because I think that word too easily gets abused. And unless you're like Robin Cragen's level at moving mountains, then I don't know that luxury applies. But definitely like premium end of the spectrum. And I think there's a lot of the returns are better there. And so if it's nice to not have to talk someone else into making those improvements, buying those kinds of properties, if you can just do it yourself. So I think that is one big advantage.
And I'll add, I think this new generation of individuals, they may very well have completely different lifestyle objectives than a traditional property manager. They may be using the vacation rental business to fund their dream home in a couple different destinations around the world,
Mm-hmm.
to be able to use it on occasion, which really comes back to what you as a stakeholder want out of this category that's blossoming. I spoke, Eddie, with a couple members of your cohort
Mm-hmm.
at the Keystone Retreat in Tennessee, and I asked them if they'd like me to zing any questions at you.
Okay.
And they all revolved around one theme, and that was core values,
I think I saw this one
which
coming.
we're giggling about because we did an exercise to determine our group's core values, and you were the most, let's just say, engaged
Mm-hmm.
a participant, of really getting specific with these things. So I'm curious if you can share for listeners, perhaps in hindsight, how you view the role of values within your organization as a determinant of getting what you want, and how knowing that clearly really increases your odds of doing great things in this industry, as opposed to perhaps someone who's listening who doesn't know exactly what they want or doesn't know exactly what they stand for, and is just kind of going with the flow and taking opportunities as they come.
Yeah, I thought that exercise, the core values exercise at the Keystone Retreat, was super valuable. And of course, you interviewed Steve Schwab on this podcast a few weeks ago, and you guys go in much more depth there about that exercise and how he thinks through it. And you're right that I was animated. I was excited about that exercise because, I've spent time thinking through what I want our core values to be at our company. I think I'm still working on it. I haven't quite hit the nail on the head yet. And I had been doing that exercise even before the Keystone Retreat, so it was already kind of on my mind, but I was struggling with it. And I think that Steve's paradigm, especially of like the difference between values and principles, I think is a super helpful one, and it helped me bring a lot of clarity to my own thinking about the core values that I want for my company, because I think I was often coming up with principles and trying to call them values, and that's why I was a bit unsatisfied with the results I was getting out of the whole thing. So when Steve introduced that that paradigm at the retreat, I found it super helpful in my own thinking, and in some ways, though, I think, and I shared this with Steve, that I think that there are parts of it that aren't perfectly fleshed out yet, and so I was asking prodding questions about that to try and like really drill down and get specific, because I think his model could be really helpful for a lot of people, not just in our industry, but all kinds of industries. But I think it just needed a little bit of refinement. And I know he continues to do this, and he was really great too about being open to that feedback, and you can tell that he kind of understands that the model's maybe not perfect yet, and is looking to improve it, and looking to grow, and that willingness to take critical feedback from someone else in a group setting, I thought was spoke highly of him. But it's a really great framework. I would recommend listeners who haven't yet listened to that episode of the podcast to go back and do so. But you're right. For some reason, everyone in the cohort just thought it was hilarious that I was so engaged on that.
Sarah and I, in particular, asked me to ask you, what is Eddie's central, innermost, or most essential part of anything? What is Eddie's piece of iron, bundle of iron wires, or other ferrous material forming the central or inner portion in an electromagnetic or induction coil? What is Eddie's nucleus? And I said, Sarah, I'm not going to ask him that. But I think it was just perfectly indicative of how thoughtful she is and how thoughtful you are in really zeroing in on truths and rules and ways of doing things that's really required of a home runner these days. As you have come through an amazing growth journey yourself as an individual and a vacation rental professional, do you share any single educational tip for those who are maybe looking to go through that path too? Is there any overarching instruction that you'd encourage people to hear out?
Well, for someone who's brand new to the industry, there's a ton there's a ton of stuff to learn, and that's one of the reasons it's so fun to build this business. Is it, still isn't old. There's always something new to learn, always something new to incorporate. I think that it's going to be different for different people based a little bit on their market, what their goals are, what they're looking to achieve. But the best thing I could recommend, just as a general piece of advice, is find the other people in the industry who are already doing this, who are already doing what you want to do, who are maybe a little bit farther along than you are, and do your best to build relationships with them, meet them, pick their brains, and find out what it is that they're doing that's successful, and also find out what it is that they did in the past that wasn't successful, and don't make the same mistakes that they had made. Take the shortcut and learn from them. And I think that the VRMB communities is definitely one place to do this. The Keystone Retreats are a place to do this. Conferences like the VRMA International and others are all great places to do this. But I just have seen for myself, the more I can do this, the more I can meet with other people who have been doing this longer or doing it better than I am. It just accelerates, learning, accelerates growth for your company way more than any other single thing could.
Which is a wonderful way of bringing it back to where we first began, right? If you're inclined towards the industry, if you feel you have hospitality inside of you, if you begin building a vacation rental, a short-term rental company, and you begin doing all the things, doing them yourself, learning them on the ground, the hard way, the slow way, you end up with the fluency to grow and to hire people and to build on your terms. And I think that's what the potential of this industry has to offer us all.
Yeah, and I think that there are also, what I just described is so important, because there are also plenty of people out there who are not doing this in a great way, I think, honestly, who are not doing this in an admirable way. And so there are plenty of bad examples out there too. And I think if you're someone who's planning to grow a business in this industry, I think you need to look around closely at the examples that are out there, and you've got to pick a side. Like, who do I want to throw my hat into the ring with? Is it going to be the people who are mostly focused on financial results, not very concerned with hospitality, not terribly interested in the ways in which short-term rentals could impact our neighborhoods and our communities? Or do you want to throw your hat in the ring with the people who are passionate about the industry, hospitality minded, but also that love their communities and want to do right by people, and want to make sure that short-term rentals are not extractive, but on the whole, that they lift up entire communities and are a net good, a net positive. And I think you need to pick sides. And we're at the point now, and I'm excited about a lot of the stuff you're doing with the Keystone Retreats and otherwise, because I think there seems to be a lot of energy gathering around folks who want to do this the right way. And I think people in the industry need to pick sides. And I think there's a clear side to go with here.
What a beautiful final sentiment. My big takeaway from the interview with Eddie is the power of being thoughtful about how you grow. This can look like a lot of things depending on what you want out of your business. Sourcing tools that check off all your boxes, fielding feedback from people who have done it before you, putting quality over quantity. Being thoughtful is a superpower in our industry. And the opposite the rushing, the taking shortcuts, the seeking overnight success, this group of stakeholders is going to shake out in 2023, with plenty of those folks deciding that this is not in their long-term plan. But for those who are thoughtful, like Eddie, and likely you, someone listening to this podcast, this industry, it can change your life. And it can impact the community that you live in the most beautiful of ways. If this resonates with you, consider joining Eddie and me and over 1,000 of the world's most thoughtful vacation rental professionals in VRMB communities. Together, we are collaborating and building limited edition brands under one virtual roof. You can sign up at vrmb.com/join. Eddie also referenced the Keystone Retreats, and we'll be hosting another one this coming February in Darien, Georgia. That's about an hour from Savannah. If you'd like to attend, please send me an email, Matt with 2 T's at vrmb.com for the application form. It's based on small groups and building thought leadership in beautiful and comfortable surroundings. Until next time.